Good afternoon. I teach for Johns Hopkins, but I live just outside San Francisco. The internet. And yesterday morning at 7:15, as I got out of the car at San Francisco airport, my husband said to me, "I hope you have more than 5 people in your session, because you're going a really long way." And I am happy to report that we are past 5 people, right? So nobody can leave, okay? Just count the heads, okay? If you're going to leave, make sure that you are not the 5th person, because we can't drop, okay? So we want to get a sense of, we are museum people and we're also educators. We wanted to get a sense of who you guys are. How many of you are K through 12 educators? Okay. University, researcher types. Grad students. Museum people. A lot of museum people.
Isn't this the first year there's been a museum component?
What kinds of museums? Just a sense of that. We have art. Everybody's art. Okay. Any artist? Very cool. And does anybody not raise a hand? Oh, okay. Well, so, and what do you do?
Our CEO is on the board here and asked us to come.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool.
Anything about it.
After this conference,
We're learning a lot.
Well, that's great. That's great. All right. So I should also say that our third colleague, Phyllis Hecht, whose name is on the program, is the one who came up with this amazing high-tech title. We're not really sure what that means. So Geo-Mapping Interdisciplinary Connections through Object-Based Learning. We're the interdisciplinary connections and object-based learning part. We're going to talk about the Geo-Mapping. We can talk about it. But our colleague was really the one who could wax about that. We can only talk. We are going to speak with you about a project we led with students in the Johns Hopkins Museum Studies MA program during a 2-week intensive seminar last January in Washington, D.C. These are some of our students at the Air and Space Museum with a 3D printout of an important explorer dog. The Johns Hopkins Masters in Museum Studies looks at the theory and practice of museums in the context of our changing technological, social, and political environment. Our students are current and future museum professionals, and because the program is almost entirely online, they come from all over the country and from all over the world, from Singapore to Syracuse, Dubai to Denver. I actually have a student right now who's in Singapore, and I've taught someone before who's in Dubai, who is a French-Canadian woman living in Dubai, who collected and was a dealer in Chinese porcelain. So it really is global. While many of our students are at the beginning of their careers, others are mid-career or even later. It's not unusual to teach a Hopkins class that has both a director of exhibitions at a regional museum, a leader in education at a national museum, and a part-time visitor services staff member from the local historical society. The diversity of our students' experiences enriches the online learning environment. Our program was conceptualized as an online program. This is how we were born. It emphasizes technology's critical role in today's museum. It also examines new models of education, exhibition, and business strategies, while exploring the role of the museum as an agent of social change. Each student must participate in one on-site seminar, 2 intensive weeks of focused museum visits and conversations with leaders in the field whose outcome is a group project. So last year's project is what brings us here today. Our students here in this image are you can tell I work in museums because I call that an image. They're visiting the National Park Service Division of Conservation storage site in Harper's Ferry in West Virginia, right? It's in West Virginia, yeah. Which, if you are a museum collections person, it's like going to heaven. It's like going to heaven. They're so excited about that. So each on-site seminar is designed with a particular focus. Our January 2014 seminar focused on the collaboration that's at the heart of every successful museum exhibition. Rather than ask our students who came from all over the country to create an on-site exhibition that would disappear at the end of our time together, we asked them to create a virtual exhibition, linking objects in natural history, art, and history museums. Central to the success of the project was the intersection of visual literacy skills with emerging technologies, curatorial strategies, and museum education principles. So today we're going to do three things. We're going to explain the method our students used to create their virtual exhibitions. I'm going to handle that. We're going to explore the use of visual literacy skills in the project. And to do this, Judy will lead you through an object-based learning exercise. And then together, we'll examine the potential of this virtual exhibition strategy. We're going to ask you to engage with us and with our students' work as we look at the exhibition they created. We'll save time at the end of the session for what we hope will be a lively discussion of this exploration of visual literacy. So how do we do this? Well, they all arrived in DC in time for the coldest cold snap that DC had seen in a long time. And many of them began by going out to buy some more long underwear. We divided our 22 students into 5 groups based on diversity of background, interest, experiences, and skills. We asked each student to create her own WordPress site. Do you know what WordPress is? Yeah? It's a blog site. It's a site where you can make your own web log. Okay. The plan was that each student would use the WordPress site, her WordPress site, as a workspace for the exhibition process, documenting objects, categorizing and tagging concepts and ideas, and creating, over the course of the 2-week seminar, a list of topics and tag cloud. A tag cloud, who knows what a tag cloud is? Say what a tag.
It's all the words people use to describe.
Based on frequency of use. So if you're gonna have a tag cloud of a cake recipe, right? Then maybe the word that you use most is gonna, if you're gonna make a souffle, the word you use most is gonna be eggs, right? So eggs is gonna be the biggest word, and then whisk is gonna be another word, and you see what I mean? And then you've seen them. And our notion was that the work that they did and within the WordPress site would both generate unifying concepts and reinforce them. So on the second day of the seminar, we took our students to the National Museum of Natural History's Curious Learning Center, brand new interactive experimental learning space on the ground floor of the museum in DC on the National Mall. Who's been to the Natural History Museum in DC? Yeah. So visitors to Curious can examine and even handle objects from the museum's collection as they learn about scientific research. This student, Sophia, not with this object, but she found an object that was a pressed block of tea leaves. It was beautiful. I mean, it looks like a woodcut almost, right?
Yeah, it was embossed.
It was embossed, yeah, textured, and she could handle it. And she had this immediate connection to her grandfather, who used to have these things in his house because he was, this whole long family story. She came running over to me and said, I found this thing, and you can hold it, you can touch it, and you could, and it also smelled like tea, right? So this morning, we were talking after the session this morning about what an amazing experience she had, and we all had because of that, because it was this multisensory experience. Each group had to choose one object from the hundreds available in the Learning Center. This object would serve as the primary object, the inspirational object, for the group's exhibition. The students used visual literacy and exhibition strategies to study the object and to come up with the big idea that would be the focus of their projects. This idea, in turn, would provide the conceptual grounding for developing an exhibition of related objects from other museums. The groups wrote about their primary objects and their big ideas on their WordPress sites. And we're going to walk you through this process at the end. For the rest of the first week, we continued to visit DC museums and engage with museum practitioners. Each student now had to choose one object that would complement his group's primary object and add to the big idea that the group had conceptualized. The student had to develop a relationship between this object and his group's primary object, a relationship that was creative, surprising, and unexpected, that brought the idea to life. Again, students were to choose their secondary object by using visual literacy skills to examine, explore, reflect, and refract. We encouraged the students to choose diverse secondary objects in order to broaden and enrich the scope of the possible connections. Again, the students used their WordPress sites to write about and picture their objects. And now I'm going to turn it over to Judy.
I'm going to read a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd like to move around. Can you hear me? No, it's not on.
There's really not a switch. No switch? Does she use this?
No, you want to come off, but it's not on. Oh.
Hello?
Oh, how'd you do it?
On the bottom.
On the Who knew? Okay. Well, so Stephanie has presented an overview of the project, and I'm just going to go back to the foundations that it was built on, the objects that are part of every museum visitor's experience. Our experience tells us, and studies confirm, that most visitors have not learned how to access the information or stories that objects can convey. In fact, the average visitor to an art museum spends, I heard less than 3 seconds. I opened it up to 10 seconds. In the visual literacy exhibit here, they said 17 seconds. I have a question about 17 seconds, but anyway, they spend very little time looking at a painting or sculpture before reading the label quickly and perhaps snapping a photo if it's permitted, and then moving on. We wanted our students to spend time looking deeply, thinking about connections across disciplines, finding relationships between art and history and science. This approach fits with the recent STEM to STEAM movement in education, and we added a history component, so we have STEAM. Schools and museums are exploring ways to create these relationships. We asked our students to put themselves in the shoes of the average visitor, not experts. They selected, as Stephanie said, Objects and Curious, which is a learning center for middle and high school students. And they considered their affective responses, including their first reactions and memories, which you've already heard a little bit about, how the objects looked, what they were made of, how they were made, who or what made them. And to quote Henry Glassy, the great emeritus professor of folklore and material culture at Indiana University, the only reason to study artifacts is to get at the people behind them. Students conducted research to go beyond what the objects themselves could convey, to find out what they could tell us about the past, the present, the future, and ourselves. And so we thought maybe we should try it. So take out your mobile device. I thought it was wonderful that David Howes also mentioned this object as something that's changing our world very quickly, as we know. So hold it up and look around. Okay? Different sizes, different shapes, different, iPads and so forth, but they're mobile devices, right? And you see lots of many kinds. How many have iPhones? How many have the Android Right. Why did you choose, does somebody have something else? Okay, so it's pretty close, right? Or, I mean, it's divided pretty much, I mean, those two. Why did you choose an iPhone? Anybody?
It talks to my other equipment.
Okay, and why did you choose an Android? It's cheaper. There you go. Okay, very good. So, how do you feel about your mobile device? Just, Hate it. Why?
Terrible reception. I hate the keyboard. I have to go outside my house on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, you've got too much jamming. Right. Anybody else? How to feel about their mobile device? Yeah.
I love my mobile.
Why?
It is my special friend. It's with me all the time. It
Right.
amuses me.
It amuses you. Yes. Why? What? Love, hate. So we cover. Right, right. Okay, so we pretty much cover the gamut as far as that's concerned, I think. It's interesting that these things have become so much a part of our lives. I resisted it for so long, but I've given up. I sleep next to it now, you know, it's one of those things. How long ago did you buy one? Who bought one, you know, when? We're not talking about a lot of time. Smartphone, what, 6 years ago, 5 years ago? Who has had one for a number of years now? Yeah, well, okay, you guys are on the cusp. You're pushing, very good. So let's look a little deeper at these objects. Just look at it carefully, and how would you describe it? What are some of the descriptive words that you would use? Portable. Portable? Shiny. Sleek. Rectangle, but curved edges, so it's nice and comfortable in the hand. Lots of research. Oh, yes. Right. Other things about it? Light. Fits in your pocket. As some of them, not so much anymore. They seem to get smaller, and then they got larger. Yes. Anything else in terms of description? Intrusive. Okay, that has a little affective component. All right, okay. And then we could talk about all of the different elements that are part of this machine. And why do they all look so different? Because they really come in very basic colors. What have we done that has created a new industry around this object? Cases. So, say again? Personalized it. And hold up the backs. I mean, you know, it becomes a real statement, I guess. I don't know. But these are expensive, too. There's a whole new industry around that. The shape, the size, anything interesting about it. Okay, and I was going to have you work in pairs, but I'm not going to do that because I'm worried about time. So if we were going to compare and contrast these, we'd see that there are these differences in these elemental functions that we've already talked about. And if you've gone to see the visual literacy exhibition here at the museum, you know, this museum has a, this museum is on it. I mean, very definitely. There are a lot of art museums that don't even come close to what's going on here. But there is a museum, a little exhibition, one room, that has some categories that you can look at and learn how to look at these things and compare and contrast different elements in them, which I think is a very important part of visual literacy. We can talk about what it can do. What are some of the things this thing can do? Communicate. Tell me more. Browse the internet.
FaceTime with my grandson.
FaceTime with someone far away. That's a special communication, yes. Anything else that you... What did we do before? We got lost. We just... All right. All kinds of information. Research. You hear a word, you Google it, and you know a whole lot of stuff, more than you ever probably needed to know, but nevertheless, it does have tremendous capacities for that. What kinds of questions would you ask about your cell phone, your mobile device?
How is it changing this?
Okay. Okay, that's a good one to come back to. I want to come back to that. I don't think that's a good question. Let's go away from that. Okay, so we shared, if you had been talking to someone, we would have shared the object, we would have shared the questions, and then something happens and the object goes mute, and it can't tell you any more about it. And that's when you have to go to research. And I did, and I'm not going to bore you with all the information that you can get on the internet about mobile devices. I mean, when they were started, and they really go back very far, but there were different ways of connecting, which had to do with radio waves, Marconi, that rings a bell somewhere, but it was wired, and then it became wireless, and now we all have mostly they were tied to automobiles, actually, and the police used them. But now we just take them with us. We put them in our pockets. We can communicate almost anywhere. What's it made out of? Do you know anything about the materials that this thing is made out of? Say again? Rare metals. Yes, yes. Glass, crystal, yeah, LED glass, yeah. And the cases, all kinds of petroleum derivatives, or aluminum. Some of them are now made out of aluminum. Lots and lots of information about what it's made of. How is it made? Worth thinking about. Who made it? Who made it? That's the question, and that's become a political issue, hasn't it? And now we have, I think I read that Motorola is trying to make them in the USA, in Texas. But most of them are made in various places and put together here. Yeah. How does it work? I'm not going to go into it. I'm full of cells and cell phones and towers and stuff like that. But, you know, if you need to know that. When the object can't convey anything more, you need to know that. And I'm thinking that I'm using a material culture, you know, something from our own time, but I think it goes back to any object, and I think it goes back to paintings, to fine arts too, because they don't exist out of a time, and they are made by someone, and I think those kinds of questions are legitimate to find out more about it, about the object itself. I'll give you some numbers. I mean, it's absolutely staggering. 1.4 billion smartphones and counting. 1.8 million sold per day. I mean, this is really becoming a very serious thing. After you ask questions that have to do with the object itself, and there's information, so there are right or wrong answers to it, then you can go beyond the objects. What's wonderful about it? What's not so wonderful about it? And that's worth thinking about. What does it tell us about us? What does it tell us about how it's changing the world? Can you think of, somebody already mentioned a question like that. Can you think of any other questions that go outside of the object?
Well, it's about the collections that we make within them. So whether it's a collection of music or a collection of images.
So what does that...
Personal stories, or you create your own exhibition through the choices.
That's right. So it tells us a lot about us. A lot about us. Anything else? Anyone else? Yes?
How has it changed everything else?
How has it changed the rest of the world? Think about all the other places that this becomes a vital piece, such a vital piece. Yeah. And we could find more. At this moment, I'd kind of like to step back and see what are the elements that I say the elements of visual literacy are, or object-based learning. I use object-based learning and visual literacy interchangeably. I don't know if anybody has an issue with that, but that's the way I do it. So when you think about what did we do with this?
What did you do in the exercise?
Yeah, what did we just do?
Looked at it closely.
Yes, we slowed down and took a good look. I could have stretched this powerfully, okay, for a long time. What else did we do?
Did a visual analysis of it?
Yes, we did. What else? Deconstructed. Got some more information, which you would have had to go out and get, and I threw a little bit at you, but you know it's there. Then we kind of put it together and said bigger things that it tells us about that go beyond itself. something that's more of a synthesis. So I would like you to look at a chart. Ugh. Too much, but object-based learning, visual literacy is in the middle. Yeah. What do I do? Push. Okay. If you start in the middle, it starts with perception, memory, interests, attitudes. It's an easy way in because when you ask someone to do that, there's no right or wrong answer. Somebody has an immediate response. And then we did a description and inventory of its attributes. Some were simple, some got to be more complex. And then we took it apart and we found relationships and patterns and comparisons and links. And then we put it together in a kind of interpretation that made connections between this and other things around us, the world around us. And we got some new understandings and new meanings. Maybe not for this audience, but certainly for students, for kids. This is something. And I also don't mean to say that this is a hard and fast template. You have to do this, then you have to do this, then you have to do that. It doesn't work that way. You go back and forth through it. But what I found very interesting is that if you look over here to critical thinking, and these are the skills, I still use Bloom's taxonomy. There are lots of different ways of thinking about critical thinking. But certainly when he started exploring this with people in the 50s, they came up with this, and usually it's actually from the bottom up, because knowledge is the most simple form of information, and it requires the least amount of thinking. You can hear something, prove that you can understand it, and prove that you can apply it. Then you can use analysis that then takes things apart. You classify, you categorize, you draw conclusions. And at the bottom is synthesis. You put things together. You say, what if? You infer, you predict, you create. And finally, I use this piece, inquiry, as part of the method I use when I teach and what we used with our students. There are two kinds of questions. There are closed questions, cognitive memory questions. They ask you to recall. And there are right or wrong answers. And if you're taking a test and you fill in the blank, either you know it or you don't. So those kinds of questions. And actually, schools primarily use this kind of questioning, although that's beginning to change also. Then there are convergent questions. That is processing information, finding similarities and differences, comparing and contrasting, and categorizing. And there still are right answers if you know it. There are right answers, but if you don't, you have to get more information. And then there are open questions, divergent questions that ask for new ideas and that are open-ended and that are interpretive. And by the way, I also know that in addition to asking questions, there is something called wait time. And I think you tested my wait time a couple of times. And usually it has to do with my not asking the right question. But wait time, that has been explored in museums and with docents, as a matter of fact. And they tested their visitors and found that if a docent asks a question and waits 4 seconds, 4 to 7 seconds, more people will start to respond and you'll get better answers. And if you wait again, other people will join the conversation. So wait time is very significant. And some of us have a fear of empty space, of empty spaces around a question, and we rush in to give the answer quickly. But wait time is very important. If you look at these across the chart, you'll see that they line up. The simplest kind of thinking skill has to do with the easiest accessible information. And the questions are pretty simple. And the further down you go, you're asking for analysis, and then finally you're asking for interpretation or synthesis. So for me, and for us, and for our students, full visual literacy is a combination of these things. Not just how it looks, but what more can it convey to us? What happens when it can't? And then pulling it all together and creating some new ideas. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah.
So, I have the pointer.
Pointer.
Can you guys see that? Yeah.
Do you know what it is? Can you see what it is?
Okay, I'm going to describe it to you. It's not a blank, well, it's sort of a blank map. How far to here? Judy,
There's too
let me
much
have
light,
that.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, can we turn down the light? Would that help, do you think? No, it's just bad. Okay, all right. So,
Technology.
so this is, if Dali were going to draw a map of the National Mall in DC, it might look like this. And what we have, okay, the Capitol is here. And not only is it out of focus, but it's quivering. So I just want you to know that I'm suffering too, okay? This is the National Museum of Natural History. This is the National Gallery. That's Air and Space. This is the Hirshhorn. This is the Newseum. Newseum, do you guys know the Newseum? The Newseum is it's a museum that, who is it, Gannett?
No, it's
Gannett.
It's Gannett money, right? It's a museum of, it's a very interactive sort of contemporary museum of journalism.
And the First Amendment.
First Amendment is their big thing. It's a very cool place. And my favorite thing about the Newseum is on Pennsylvania Avenue. And it's a great building in that it points you straight toward the Capitol. And so every exhibit you see, you go out and you look at the Capitol and you think, well, how are we doing? And on the street level, every day, they have a whole block long of cases, of museum cases, in which they put front pages of newspapers from around the world. And people walk by. I mean, in fact, you see homeless people walking by, and like that's how they get their news, you know. So that's the Newseum. And this is the National Portrait Gallery, I think. Oh, yeah, okay, it's the Building Museum. Right. So what we asked our students to do, we began at the Natural History Museum, right? And our students created a Google map, or they cut and paste a Google map. And they linked their objects on this map, okay? So for this group, these are the objects that they chose. Does anybody know what that is? It's very small for you. It's a maquette of Philip Johnson's glass house. This one, it's a familiar scene, maybe? Daniel and the Lions. Nice, very nice. This one, cut piece. This, it's from the Newseum. Yes, it is. Okay, this one, you're not going to know what that is. That's a dwarf crocodile skin. And this one is from Air and Space, and it is a spacesuit. It's a spacesuit. So those are the objects that this group chose. Their primary object was this crocodile skin. We encouraged our students to reach, to think broadly, to take chances, and one strength of the project was that our students were not limited to the objects in one museum. They had access to, we visited, oh God, I don't know how many, like 10 museums? 13? We let them choose among, I think, 6 or 7. So they didn't have, but a wide variety, everything from the portrait gallery to the Newseum to the natural history, right? While the connection between Yoko Ono and Daniel may not be immediately apparent, our students used the project to build a conceptual bridge between the objects that made both resonate in new ways, which is, after all, what you try to do when you make an exhibition in a museum. So here, then, to go back to the map, here, Judy, do you want to?
Yeah. Okay, so we have the dwarf crocodile skin, and it was related to those objects that you saw. And there was information embedded in the WordPress blog about that. He had tons of information and links to all different.
So here it is. This is a shot from the blog.
Right. And lots of information from the museum, and then links to other information about the object. But the big idea, read his big idea.
So his big idea,
the group.
Was that what protects us from the outside world, also leaves us vulnerable to the environment. But what protects us from the outside world also leaves us vulnerable.
So the crocodile, which is prized for its skin, the skin protects it, but we take the skin and destroy the animal for it. And it was that wonderful little intellectual twist that they used.
So our students found this object at Natural History on the first day, all folded up in a box, right? They couldn't touch it. There's a hierarchy. I'm sure hierarchy is not the right word, but there's an organizational system for which objects you can touch and which objects you can't. Of course, if we all touched the crocodile skin, it wouldn't last forever. But they were able to get the photograph of it from the museum. They then did research on the object. They learned as much as they could by looking at it, and then they did the research, right? And then they thought about what the question was. What's the big idea that this object inspires? So you go back to the map.
And there it's the Berlin Wall, and it represented a different understanding of that same big idea, that what protects us also makes us vulnerable. And same thing, lots of information about it, links to more information about it. They put in, video clips. I mean, they really used as much of technology as they could to embed into this exploration.
So they were able, by the technology, to pull in all these threads that in a brick and mortar exhibition where you had, of course, the authentic objects, right? You wouldn't be able to give this kind of drilling down of information, right? Because any exhibition you walked into and you saw this much text on a wall, right? You'd glaze over immediately. But our minds, our brains, the way that we work with screens will take in. We have a lot more patience, for better or worse, with drilling down and drilling deeper. So our students, at the end of the 2 weeks, had to present their exhibition to us virtual, on screen, excellent resolution when they did their presentations, I'd like to say, and walked us through a lesson plan.
Right. So they had the big idea at the top. They had specific objectives, what visitors to this virtual exhibition would take away as a result of being there. They had, they would be able to identify different definitions and interpretations of skin. These are their learning objectives. And then there were some experiential objectives. They could interact with the virtual exhibit through Google Maps, and then use critical thinking skills to explore objects connected thematically. And then they had a whole series of questions within which they embedded information. So the primary object, what is this? Why do you say that? Where have you seen this before? Why does it have scales? What do you think about? What do you think it feels like? What is its function? How did it protect the crocodile? What did it protect it from? Why is this in a museum? How do you think it got there? Does this change how you think about the crocodile skin? What about someone who wears a crocodile skin? So they moved from just looking at the object itself to thinking about it in a much more abstract way. And each group did a lesson plan like this for each of the objects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to end with, instead of conclusions, we wanted to end with questions. I come from a curatorial background, and I think this was a interesting project, and I think our students got a lot out of it, and it's very hard for me to reconcile the absence of the authentic object. So that one question I have is, how does a virtual exhibition relate to a traditional exhibition? What do we lose and what do we gain? How can object-based learning and visual literacy translate to the virtual realm? What does it mean when we're not standing in front of the thing? Do we have the same relationship? And then finally, how might this technique be adapted and adopted in different settings? Would this be a useful thing for a school? Would it be an interesting project to do with other museums? And we have about 10 minutes.
For answers or questions of yours.
And we can wait a long time. Yes?
Could you speak a little bit more about the process for 5 students to agree on the primary object? Because you said the big idea came after they researched their primary object, right?
Yeah, it's very interesting what happens. You know, these students know each other only from online experience, and they are so thrilled to come together for 2 full weeks. And by the way, this unfolded in 2 weeks. It was intense. And meanwhile, we were traveling to all different kinds of museums and places. As this was happening, we left them time to do research. But somehow, when they met in real life, and we divided them up, and we had done it ahead of time, and they had talked to each other and set up their blogs and all of that ahead of coming to DC for those 2 weeks. And when we took them to Curious, we had the curator there, the director, show us around, and then we set them off, and we gave them time to find an object. It just happened. They came together.
And it's also, I think that if I have never worked with a group of colleagues with whom I could have come up with a primary object and a big idea, 5 of us working together in the space of 2 days. I mean, people might have gone to the emergency room. The people I've worked, it could have been bloody, right? I mean, issues, real issues. But there's a lot less ego involved with it, with the graduate students who are there. It's like summer camp, except it's in DC and it's 22 degrees, you know? I mean, it's such an intense experience, and they are so dedicated to the premise that they are going to have an intense intellectual experience, you know? And that, I think that frees it up.
Other questions?
Yes?
Do you have other graduate students in other areas, maybe not in Washington, D.C., that actually share this with them? Do other peers with them?
We share it online.
Yeah.
It's hard to know how much it gets, how much it disseminates across the field, across the program. Honestly, by the time, I mean, we taught it together. By the time we were finished teaching it at the end of 2 weeks, I was not checking to see. I was so tired, and so was Judy. We were both.
Yeah.
So.
I'm not sure, and one of the things that may still happen is that Curious, the learning center, not so little, wonderful learning center at NMNH, may investigate this as something they can use as a prototype there, where students could come in and look at the real thing, and then have a virtual experience happening in conjunction with that. But that has not happened yet, and I think they just opened. They've been crazy busy. We see this as a prototype for other experiments with it, and we'd love other people to talk with us and see if we could help set that up.
Did you do anything to measure the learning or experience outcomes of anybody who interacted with them?
No, with the students, you mean?
Well, with the online exhibition, I mean, the big idea and the outcome.
Yeah, no, it really wasn't a broadcast. It was just for us at this point. So we did not do any evaluation, which is always what you're supposed to do, right? Yeah. Yes.
You said that you were a little leery about, doing away with the traditional based how do you feel if you extrapolate that and stretch it out to being, you know, making an entire collection available virtually as
Right.
opposed to just an exhibition?
Right.
Do you think that there's a lot that's being lost, or too much is at stake and not enough gained from having that available to other people virtually?
I'm a huge believer in putting everything online and making it all free. I mean, because I teach online museum studies students, I also teach real live in-person museum studies. I mean, my online students are also live, and they're just not, you know. But I also teach people in a brick and mortar classroom. I know for many of our students in the Hopkins program are not from major metropolitan areas. They don't have access to this museum, you know, or to the National Gallery, or to the Getty, except insofar as they have access online. And that is huge. It's just huge that they can go and they can download images and they can compare this version of Daniel with that version of Daniel. I think it's a different experience than being able to go sit upstairs and look at that Rothko. You know, I think it's a really different experience. I'm not prepared to say that one's better or worse.
I think it's coming.
What did you say?
They complement each other.
Yeah, they complement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think this is definitely a possibility for the future.
Yes.
Well, to build on that, in the case of like the caves of Lascaux, it's the only thing that exists that sort of researchers can because they totally
Yeah.
ruin the caves with all the attempts, with all the tourists and the guides and trying to do that air conditioning thing. It
Yeah.
just totally
Yeah.
ruined it after the certain thousands
Okay.
of years. But now they have a phenomenal virtual tour of the caves where you go in almost in a first person and go up and down and go
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and it's like, you know, Google Art Project. You know, you can get so much closer, sort of, you know. You can see so much more detail than you could ever see. I mean, even if you got, you know, too close to the painting in the museum, you would still never be able to see that kind of detail. And I think that it gives you I think in a way that experience can prepare you to going and seeing the Night Watch, you know, because then you already have that connection. You think, oh, I really want to see that particular hem. You know, that hem is where there's a little bit of string hanging off, and I want to go see that because I own that, you know, because I've sat at my desk, you know, with my cup of tea. Do you see what I mean? You
Yep.
and then you.
One thing I always think about when I'm looking at things online is how the sense of scale is just gone. You don't really know if something's huge or if it's tiny.
So
Even if
true.
they tell you how big it is, and that's something that you really lose.
Really.
I mean, you could get up really close in the Google images, but
Yeah.
you still don't know what it really looks
Oh,
like
yeah.
because you don't know how
Oh,
big
yeah.
it is in relation to you.
Yeah.
And that's what I was thinking about when I looked at your dwarf crocodile skin. It's like, I don't know how big that is. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, we should have had a slide with a student holding it or something
That's
like
true.
that. Yeah.
If we'd only known.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
were looking at the Flickr site. They were taking photographs every day and posting them, and we looked through them, but we just
Yeah.
didn't have the ones we
Yeah,
needed.
but I think you do. I once had a student at Hopkins who was going to do a exhibition project for me, and she was going to compare this set of small watercolors with a set of Matisse cutouts. And you know, she was going to install it in this very small gallery in Baltimore. And I said, "Have you ever seen the Matisse cutouts?" And she said, "Oh no." And I said, "Well, they're the size of a room." And she's, "Oh." So
something has to be added to
you
the
do
way
need
we-
to know. Yeah.
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 Yeah, I was just thinking, I've been studying what's been happening with MOOCs.
Yeah.
You know, the attempts to deliver education to thousands of people and the problems with attrition. This idea, though, could address, I think, some of those issues because the students are automatically more engaged, it sounds like, when they're working collaboratively like this. So as
Yeah.
advice for engagement in that scenario, I think there might be another application.
Yeah, and our classes often have group, even though they're online, you have to do a group project online.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, so there are ways to make that happen.
Yeah, yeah. Also, I mean, I should clarify that this is a degree program, and our classes are no bigger than 15 people. So it would.
Not MOOCs.
I couldn't possibly grade all those papers. But I think that as people who are thinking about how do you move education online go forward, I think that these could be kinds of models that would be useful.
Could you just speak to the geo-mapping a little bit? I mean, I know I saw your map, but just kind of in the context of the exhibition, or?
So the idea there is that, I mean, we used the National Mall. You could make a map of any scale. The map is well, I mean, it's the connective tissue that gets you from A to B, right? So are you asking a question about how do you put those dots on the map? Or are you asking which is a fine question, or are you asking a more theoretical question?
More theoretical, I guess the title of your talk, I was interested to know how it played into this, or if it was simply
That's
the map.
So far as we understand,
right.
that was just the map.
Okay.
Yeah. But we can ask our colleague. One more?
Any more? Okay. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.